You're listening to ABA On Call, hosted by myself, Kubina and Doug Kostewicz. This is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ABA On Call. Doug, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
I can see you're in your office at Pitt. There's the beautiful background.
Mm-hmm.
And those books over there that I know you've never read, but
That's
fool
right.
people and you're like, hey, look at me. I'm a professor. I have books.
Yeah, look at those behind you, but those are all comic books, right?
All of them are comic books, absolutely. We have a fun episode today, Doug. And you know what's It's going to be different today because instead of having here's the differences. Number one, instead of having 3 sections, we're only going to have 2 sections.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that is, I think, unique about this is normally you and I will talk beforehand. I don't know what you're going to say because we didn't talk about this episode. So it could go anywhere. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to be fun because you never disappoint. And we are going to review a book that is written by a famous cognitive psychologist. His name's Daniel Kahneman. And just to give everyone a background, Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize in 2002 for something called prospect theory that does show up in this review of the book. This is another one of his accomplishments. This is a huge bestseller called Thinking Fast and Slow. There was a comma in there. So it's not thinking fast and slow. It's thinking fast and slow. He's a pioneer of many research programs. He also came up with loss aversion. And of course, he shaped this science that we call well-being. Now, we're not going to go into all of that, but this book has a lot of information and it is written from a cognitive perspective. And what we're going to do is 2 things here. One, you and I are going to, and again, we didn't compare notes here, but we're just going to talk about things that jumped out at us as important contributions. And this is in no means can we cover everything that this guy's done because he had I don't know, when did he start? Like in the 50s or 60s, maybe?
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Really a big pioneering person in much of his work. And we'll talk about things that jumped out at us. And then the second part will be for you and I to look at how do we interpret this behaviorally? Because as 2, dyed-in-the-wool behavior analysts, we can't help but interpret the entire world. Now, that's not to discredit anything that this guy said.
Nope.
It's just to, wow, he's talking about it this way. How do we interpret it?
Right. Well, first, before we get into anything, I think because we only have 2 sections, we need a secret word.
Yes, we do.
So we're going to give you your first secret word right now, and that is thinking.
Okay.
So
we got one down.
All right.
Well, let's get into his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which for those of you who are out there, well, let's start off with this, Doug. Would you recommend this to our audience members to read? What's your take on that?
You're just going to hit me with that one off the bat?
I'm teeing up the back. Boom! What is it? And this is your opinion. I don't know what's
it's my opinion. So it's sort of a little bit of a mesh of the first and second part of today's podcast. I would recommend it for 2 reasons. One, it's good to see how cognitive psychologists view these topics, right? Thinking and it's a well-written book, but also it's a challenge as a behavior analyst because you begin to translate and you're testing how well behavior analytic, verbal behavior, etc. And you start to translate the information to how we may view these things. I'll be honest with you. it can be very frustrating to listen to some of these explanations. And we'll get into that later. But
Sure.
so my recommendation, it's not a light read. This isn't a fun, just going to do, but it is a challenge. And yeah, I think it's, if you want to challenge yourself, I think it's a interesting book.
Okay. Well, my recommendation is yes, read this. I think you and I, when we approach these topics, I take them for what they're offering and focus on what's the lessons here? What are we learning? And like everything that you said is absolutely true. There'll be times where I sit back and I'm like, huh, this could be explained so much more parsimoniously, but I try not to let that ruin my experience or affect my experience of the book. So let's get into some of the things that we liked about it. Let me start the train rolling, and or is it the ball rolling? Trains are on tracks. That was mixing metaphors there.
You're
Uh,
okay. You're
he
fine.
has his big part of his big theory is he talks about having these two systems, system one and system two. When you think about system one, and that first part of the book, just spends a lot of time, and this is what psychologists do. When you're from any framework, you're trying to understand the world. Why do we as humans do what we do? You and I happen to be, and our listeners happen to be, part of a specific school of thought, and that's how we think about the world. But we don't always run into everything that our colleagues in the cognitive psychology world. So, system one are when you do fast automatic things. Like you see a snake and you're like, whoa, you're not consciously thinking about it. You're just reacting to it. Whereas system two, this is much more deliberate. This is when you do have time to think about things. So in that snake example, maybe you step back and you're like, oh, that's not a snake. That was just a stick or, a plastic toy or whatever.
Mhm.
And he talks a lot about system one and
Yeah.
system two.
Yeah. And so building on that, it, uh, I don't want to move into the second part
Yeah,
of this,
hold it back,
but
Doug. Hold it back.
I know, holding it back. But it's not just thinking about it as reactionary, right? And I think he equates system one as almost quick, right? It's not necessarily fear. So expanding on that, it's things you supposedly know very well or have a misnomer about or have learned the wrong way to do things. You do them very quickly. And then all of the decisions and choices around that quick decision. Then when you're forced into something that requires more, we respond differently. And we in his terminology, we think differently about it.
Yeah.
We display various behaviors that are not apparent when, or not occurring when you are doing things fast.
Yeah.
And there's a cost and benefits that he reviews in each systems. And then the variety of things that him and his colleagues have either discovered or labeled along that way. So yeah, it was a very interesting start to the book. It did put some things into perspective. So he goes into a lot more specifics with regards to choice and decision making, and some of them I've heard about before, or so he was, so what I found really interesting were the variety of things that uh, people equate to a situation. So he tried to say, use the example of drill instructors regarding the regression to the mean and saying individuals' behavior, someone did something very, very well, and it happened to be just an odd moment or an outlier. And then somebody says, way to go. And that didn't work because that didn't make it happen good again. They regressed down, or they did a poor thing and someone yelling at them and they actually did better last time. So someone responding to him and saying, hey, when we praise these people, They do worse. When we yell at them, they do better. And he was talking about these notions of regression to the mean, etc. Uh, Definitely, we could talk about this another way in the other part. But I just, and then the value of certain things. Another thing I really liked was the value of certain rewards, and then our decision making around those, and how we don't use things like statistics to make
Yeah.
decisions. We actually go against the logical things. But again, I can explain this a little differently in the second part, but it was his observations, placing these observations in his frame.
Yeah. Well, what he's done, and this is what happens in science. If you're a psychologist, you have this theory, you build upon it, and you
Yeah.
were sharing some of the things that jumped out at you. And I have a list of things that jumped out at me too, and they flow from that. Like when you were, I like the way you talked about the first one. It is intuitive, it's fast thinking, and versus more deliberate thinking. This gets to thinking. So one of the findings, and this is what happens if you read this book. There's all of these fascinating insights that they make, and they have data to support these insights. And one of them I thought that he talked about very early on was this notion of cognitive ease versus strain.
Mhm.
And what he talked about is that when something feels easy to process, like let's say you have a very clear font or someone's speaking to you with words that you understand, it feels more true, even if it's not. So,
Right.
for example, if let's say that you wanted to engage in propaganda, and people do this, and people in
Well, never.
marketing know this.
Yes.
What you do is you make it easy for the person to be able to uh, read or understand what that message is. And the easier it is for that person, the more likely they'll think it's true, even though it's not. In that finding is important to be aware of because we're all there's these biases, and when we talk about verbal behavior, we're all suspect to these things that are happening. None of us are immune to it, and if we're aware that wait a minute, is this person trying to do this thing, and being a critical thinker is very important. And if you're aware of some of these tactics that are that we found out these things in psychology, it helps us.
Definitely. And that's why I'm looking forward to the second part of this, because the definitely those things he's finding, we make these decisions. We don't trust decisions from certain people because we don't like the way they look. They don't
Yeah.
talk the right way. It's a great observation, and not take nothing away from it. It's good to have that data. Obviously, entire fields are based on that data, and they make a ton of money, i.e., advertising, as you said.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
you go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I was going to switch gears and talk about some of the other things that he talked about, and I think you might remember this, but when they did this experiment, and this is, I don't know, I guess we're going to poison the well, and there's no way to, if you read this book, um, well, okay, if you stop right now, and I don't even know how to describe it. No, forget it. I'll just ruin it. There's this thing called the invisible gorilla. Did you ever watch that video? So
I've done it.
yeah, I've done it too, and I don't know how to share that story without ruining it. But what it is you're focusing your attention on one thing, and what this theory is because your attention is so focused, you can miss out on these glaring anomalies. And there's this video, and what they do is they tell you, okay, focus on how many times people are passing the ball, and you're watching the ball passing, and then at the end they're like, did you see the gorilla on the court? And you're like, what the F, a gorilla walk through the court. And then if you replay it, this little guy walks out and is like, hello. And it keeps on walking. And it's mind blowing to think that, how did I miss that? And that's what he's talking about in terms of this cognitive finding that he
Yeah.
had.
It was a hard, so it's even harder than watching a pass. It's watching two groups of people and they're passing two balls and you have to, I mean, it
Right.
becomes obviously a much more difficult task. If anybody's ever been at um, a baseball stadium, they play, they put the ball under the hat and they move the hat around and then you got it at the end. And I can get it most of the times, but as soon as something gets in my way and it's a hard cast to stay focused on. They could probably have a gorilla walking out and I would miss that because I was not be focused on anything else. But yeah, that's your tension. And again, he places this within his theory, within his framework, and explains it that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things are, just we make really bad decisions. I was just re-listening to a part that if you had a 95% chance of getting a positive result, entire industries such as a structured settlement, they charge you a lot to give you 100%. But if you went into something with a 95%, such as I'm going to go to court, it could be a 95% chance you're going to win this. But if you're going to give me a lot less to guarantee it, we gravitate towards that, even though 95% is an amazing. I mean, we're happy with that in science, let
Yeah.
alone thinking about that. So it's in his field, he's trying to put these decisions, choices, thinking, ease within that kind of structured cognitive realm.
Yeah. By the way, what you just described was part of what he calls prospect theory, which
Yeah.
is a huge thing in psychology and in economics. And yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the second secret word, which I totally forgot. Doug, can you give me a
It
reminder?
is choice.
Ah, choice. Okay. Very good. Well, this is the part that you have been chomping at the bit.
I have
And
been chomping at this.
tell me, okay, we want to talk about how can you translate some of these things behaviorally, which I know every single thing you read, you were instantly translating it into, well, this is how we
Sorry.
talk about in behavior analytics. So tell me one thing. Let's just start off with one thing that jumped out at you that you could translate behaviorally.
So one of the things, and I'm going to say this generally, and I kind of figured this out just as you were talking now. One thing that psychology and other sciences that look at larger populations do is they try to come up with general things.
Sure.
Behavior analysts, we tend to look more to the individual. And so what I found myself doing was listening to how people, quote, generally respond. But then I'm thinking, really on the individual level, what's ignored is the individual's learning history, the individual's history with certain contingencies, the value of certain reinforcers, the value of certain consequences. And what's ignored or not taken into account is, so for example, I hear, oh yeah, people tend to ignore stats, but then I think about it as, there are people, if they've traditionally won, or this is way more valuable for them, you see a very different choice model than, so it's this notion of thinking about the individual versus trying to make overall global claims. That was one of the big things for me. And the second, and I'm going to steal whatever I can from this conversation, is thinking about things that are easy, thinking about things. I liken this to fluency, our ability to,
Taking mine.
I am, because you took mine to start with. The ability of an individual, our learning history, how fluent we are with certain performances, how how can, so you may call reading it easy behavior, but if I can't read, then I'm now quote unquote in this higher cognitive ability and I'm not even responding the same way. So you think about stuff that people are deciding to make it easy. What they're really trying to do is hit people where they're highly fluent or has a high reinforcement value, generally speaking. So that I started to see that underlying theme, and now you can take whatever you want from that.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it just goes to show you and I were thinking along the same line. I thought uh, just at the very beginning, when you think about system one and system one is fluent behavior, system two is rule governed behavior. And, that's, if you start framing it that way, then, that kind of helps. But uh, when I was thinking about one of the things, we reviewed a book in the past, and
Hmm.
I forget the title, but remember that one about conspiracy theory and,
Was that nonsense on stilts?
no, no, no. This was on, it was by another cognitive psychologist who talked about why people fall into conspiracy theories. Any rate, that book will come back to me later. Um, One of the things that Kahneman talked about and reviewed is he talked about these cognitive biases that we all have. And when we behaviorally think about cognitive biases, which they exist, so not saying that there's no such thing, but rather than call it a cognitive biases, I like to refer to them as faulty discriminations.
Yeah.
And,
Good call.
you have these heuristics and they're simply based on our reinforcement history. And let's bring something in. Let's talk about an example. Unfortunately, we live in a world where school shootings are way more common, but statistically, they're very unlikely to happen. Even
Yes.
though, if we had five and they doubled to 10, that is a troubling increase. But thinking about how many schools are there and still what is the likelihood that when your
Right.
child goes to school that they're likely to be involved in school shooting? Very, very likely or very, very
Very,
unlikely.
very unlikely.
Thank you. And what happens is parents, through media exposure, through listening to podcasts, through opening up their CNN or Fox or whatever people are looking at, through your web browsers, these shootings are happening, and it seems like they're happening. So there's these salient but misleading cues and information, and that's just faulty discrimination. You can call it cognitive biases, but if we interpret it through discrimination, generalization, it's
Yeah.
more robust and it helps us understand the world in a different way.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I was going to use generalization as an explanation for some of the other things as well. It comes back to stimulus control. And
Absolutely.
um we, you think every time I'm always listening to these types of things, I'm immediately on guard. So unlike you, who listens to them and it's like, oh, what can I learn from this? I'm already translating. I'm like,
Let's
no,
sum
this,
up.
how many times did I text you? I'm like, this is so frustrating. Why are
You
you doing
did
this to
many
me?
times.
I was like, but the notion that how well I can do something, but then
Yeah.
also, he did have a good example. I was listening again. He was in Israel at the time. I think he's from
Yeah.
he's either Jewish or
He's an
from
Israeli
Israel.
psychologist. He was.
Yes. So he was talking about bus bombings and how many buses there are and how there's really low light. But because he hears it on the news, he was nervous. He's pulling away from intersections very quickly. That's right there. But it's also what isn't taken into account is the value of those consequences for those individuals.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a huge avoidance contingency not to be blown up. I mean, for most people, that consequence is something you want to avoid. So that's a very valuable escape maintain or avoidance maintain contingency. just on the versus winning $1 billion is a big positive consequence for most people, right?
Yeah.
And you see interesting behaviors under those conditions. Why do lotteries run? Why does the news only play negative things? There's a whole bunch of contingencies that are going on there, regardless to how you want to name it. And then that was the big frustrating thing. And you use the word I was going to parsimony. I mean, it is, you're adding so many extra steps and you don't need all those extra steps to explain a lot of these things. So yeah,
Yeah.
stimulus control, fluency, and the value of consequences for individuals
Well,
are
let's,
really things that can explain.
yeah. There's so much I could jump onto that, but I'm going to switch gears because this book was so big. Another thing that jumped out at me is he talked about the law of least effort.
Mhm.
And the way this was explained is that humans default to low effort strategies. And the explanation is we do this not because we're lazy, but because we're efficient. No, we make the decisions that we make is an easy one.
Mhm.
It maybe not the right decision, but we make an easy decision. And it's because of this law of effort. And, I can already see, the wheels spinning, Doug. You know how we explain this law of least effort.
I always say behavior rolls downhill,
Yes,
right? And that's, yeah, we do the least to get the most.
always.
And
It's
that's not
response effort.
because, and hey, yeah, you can call me lazy, but I'm human. So
Yes.
we're going to do the least to get the most. And it's not, I mean, it can just be explained by that, right? I mean, there's so much in this book. Now, like I said, the challenge of translating it really tests you because you need to bring in verbal behavior, verbal communities, thinking about how things are work. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, behavior rolls downhill. I always joke about.
It, any kind of habits that we have. And what's interesting is, this is a guy who is creating these theories to help explain behavior. And
Mhm.
if you are a student and you're brought up in this school of thought and someone says, well, why is it that people, you say, oh, it's the law of least effort. That law of least effort, if we look at the causality and we say, well, it's humans like to do low effort things because they're more efficient, that's not the best way to explain it. You said a much better way of explaining it, which is through this concept of reinforcement. And if we understand, and by the way, we have this thing called the matching law, and we've discovered all of this information, and maybe it doesn't sound as sexy as this law of least effort, where we're ascribing these values to the person doing these things. Whereas if we look at the environment and how we've been shaped up, that's not as fun.
I I'm not at all surprised. I think you and I have both either read, interacted with, talked about cognitive psychology. And so not all of this was surprising. I think, you know, these individuals, you mean, like you said, we have a way of thinking
Yeah.
and, we tend to gravitate, well, actually we don't tend to, we gravitate towards sort of a natural scientific explanation. We build our science from the ground up, and they're from a different school of thought. They go from theory down. And so everything has to
Right.
kind of fit within that. And they're just kind of like the unassailable truths that we're going to establish, and then we'll build things back. So, yeah, I mean, so many of the things presented ended up with the same explanations. And I'm thinking, you've got a lot of novelty and names for things like equivalence.
Yeah.
My goodness, stimulus equivalence explained a ton as well. I mean, there's so many aspects. We went into a bunch of them. There's so many that a lot of what we have explains a lot of
Sure.
other things. I mean, I'm sorry, not a lot. A very few things explain a lot of what's going on, and we don't have special names for them.
Yeah. Well, I this whenever I read these kind of books, like we said earlier, or like I said earlier, I try to learn something from them. And this is what I think how we should respond to other colleagues that aren't in our same school of
Yeah,
thought. There's evidence for all these things that he had. He's done hard science,
yeah,
and he has experiments, and that stuff is hard. And you can do that really well. You can find something, you can send it into a journal. It can be peer reviewed. It can receive accolades. You can win the Nobel. And all of that uh, is something to understand, but yet uh, in this conversation that we have, I think the underlying message is understand what these things mean, and don't get distracted by this shiny thing over here.
yeah. That was it. Yeah, that's well said. But again, there is that verbal community. So we're not faulting um, those students who work with certain fields. So that's their reinforcement history. That's what they go for. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have talked a lot about this book, which brings us to the third secret word, which is well-being.
Mhm.
Well-being. And I'm feeling a lot of well-being after being able to talk behavior analysis with you, Doug. I'm just saying.
It sounds great to end this on behavior analysis.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us on another episode of ABA On Call. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.